different in style, these two American motorsports have a lot in common. They're organized to please the spectators. Their drivers range from part-time amateurs to highly paid professionals. And both sports trace their origins to hotted-up road cars on the wrong side of the law. The folklore is that many early stock car drivers started their careers in the moonshine business. Saloon cars with souped-up engines were used to transport bootleg whiskey across the state line. A small industry grew up around building the cars.
The revenue agents would chase the moonshiner cars at night over those two-lane roads up in the hills of Georgia and the Carolinas. And a fellow named Red Vogt had a garage in Atlanta, Georgia, and he built the cars for the moonshiners in one section of the garage, and he built the cars for the revenue agents in another section of the garage. He kept them separate. One day I asked Red who got the best cars. He said, well, the moonshiners paid cash. The government agents, you had to wait 90 days to get your money from Washington. Figure it out.
Stock car racing evolved when drivers adapted family cars, cars taken from stock in the showroom. Races were run on short circuits wherever they could attract a crowd, like state fairgrounds or horse race tracks.
You worked on a regular job. Most of us had garages or something automotive to do. And then at night, after we finished our day's work, we'd work on our race cars. Then Friday night, we'd take off for wherever we were going to race. And we stayed in the same old motels or hotels. We stayed the same place, we ate together. We tried to travel together because the cars that we pulled with weren't too good and they'd break down and we'd pitch in and help each other. And we'd fight like hell, drink like hell. It was a pretty wild scene. And we got to the point where if you were a racer, you couldn't buy any insurance, you couldn't borrow any money, and we were second-class citizens, no question about it. We were about the same status, social status, as the guy that rode on the back of the garbage truck. It was recognized the doors fly open in a crash, so you'd take your belt off and wind the back window down enough to get the belt around on both sides, and that was your safety equipment. And if you didn't have a belt, you got a piece of rope.
Stock car racing was informal. It had no governing body to set standards for safety. It was dangerous and it was spectacular. This multiple crash at Langhorne, Pennsylvania in 1951 demonstrated the danger and the spectacle.
It's like a bad dream. Blinded by the smoke, many of the oncoming drivers seem helpless to avoid the nightmare in front of them. Nobody here at Langhorne will ever know. 10 drivers were hurt, 2 seriously, in what will long remain stock car racing's most spectacular crack-up.
Stock car races were held all over the country, but Daytona Beach in Florida became the spiritual home of the sport. Its long and flat beach was used for land speed record attempts. When these moved to Utah in 1936, Daytona lost an attraction. So local business interests promoted a stock car race to fill the void. A circuit was laid out, using the beach and the road which ran alongside it.
They get away, away that is, for 160 miles of top-speed straightaways and sizzling turns. 10,000 spectators line the beach road course at Daytona to watch this year's stock car race, and close attention is paid to the turns.
These jalopy jockeys are in for a jarring, jolting time, and they know it, and we know it. So hold on tight. The turnover is terrific.
And it was financial turnover, which was the attraction after the Second World War. Stock car racing looked like becoming a profitable business. In 1947, Nascar, the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing, was formed to set down rules and promote races. A permanent speedway was opened at Daytona in 1959. To give spectators added excitement, the new circuit was steeply banked for high speeds and neck-and-neck racing. The rules that cars had to be stock models were steadily changed under the pressure of racing.
When we first started, they run strictly stock cars. First thing they did was break wheels, so that they let them build the wheels up. Then they built the wheels up and they started breaking hubs. They let them build the hubs up, they broke spindles, and they let them build the spindles up. They broke tie rod ends and, you know, all of the deals. So over a period of time, it grew into a full-fledged race car.
The high-speed close racing on the back track gave rise to a new tactic known as the slingshot.
Somebody discovered that if you, a driver, are following another car very close, we're talking about 2 inches off the bumper, front bumper off the back bumper, that the other car will drag you or pull you along. 2 cars can run faster like that than 1 car can run alone. If you time it properly, you can draft behind a car, pull out to pass him, and slingshot past him. That's where the name slingshot came about, because you just slingshot by him and pull out in front of him. And of course, he'll do the same thing back to you again.
Close racing was what the spectators wanted. In the first race at the new speedway, that's what they got. The lead swapped back and forth between 2 of the fastest drivers, Johnny Beauchamp in a Ford Thunderbird and Lee Petty in an Oldsmobile. Beauchamp was judged the winner on the day, but 3 days later, after all the photographs had been studied, Petty was declared the victor by a fraction of a second. Either way, the crowd had got its money's worth. Today, stock car racing is the most popular motorsport in America, attracting substantial corporate sponsors. These cars are preparing for the Pepsi 400-mile race, which is part of the Winston Cup Series, the premier stock car championship. Part of its success lies in the prominence it brings to American car manufacturers.
Here as a race fans can go out and identify the car. You know, I drive a Ford, Dale Earnhardt drives a Chevrolet, so on and so forth. Rusty Wallace drives a Pontiac. And they can product identify to it. To where an Indianapolis type car, it's not really this or it's not really that. It's hard to visually look at it and say it's this particular car. And I think that's why NASCAR and the Winston Cup Series has become so popular.
The audience identify with the cars by their name and shape, but under the bonnet is an engine fitted only for racing. Strict rules govern what modifications can be made in an attempt to control speed and increase safety. With the rules so tightly drawn, the teams look for any way they can to get an edge over the competition. There's been a long-standing battle of wits between the organizers and the mechanics.
They would say that the gas tank got to hold 22 gallons. Well, that was a fair rule, but they didn't say how big the gas line could be. So I would put a gas line on it that held 7 gallons. And then they would take the gas tank out, and maybe if they got you mad, you could, while they were holding the gas tank or inspecting it, you could drive the car all over a hill. And then, of course, somebody would say, how the hell do you drive that car with no gas tank? And so they're looking for a secret gas tank, but it wasn't nothing secret about it, just a great big fuel line. It didn't say in the rule book you couldn't have it.
From its origins in bootlegging and beach racing, stock car racing is now firmly established in America as part of the mainstream of motorsport. The drivers perform as much for the paying spectators as for themselves. The Speedway can seat 100,000 people. On race day, they come from all over the country. There's room for 200 cars in the garage area. Here, the fans can meet their heroes, the drivers, and swap stories with them. For the drivers, being accessible to the public is all part of the job. Many of today's stars are the sons of past winners. They've been brought up to treat racing as a family business.
A race car driver's son can learn about race cars at a much earlier age than a businessman's son could learn about his father's business, just by being around the race shops and traveling on the road, working in the pits and working in the garage areas. We had an advantage over anybody else that would have to wait many more years to get that same experience.
They're going to get some good stuff tomorrow. They're going to sit in turn 4 and watch. Oh, excellent.
My father and grandfather built a little dirt track the year I was born. So I've always been around the sport. And when I turned 5 years old, for some reason, my father decided it was time for me to start racing. He built my first little race car, a little go-kart, raced on the inside of this big track. So I've been involved with the sport all my life and been driving since I was 5 years old.
At last, it's decision time for the cars, the drivers, and especially the high-spending sponsors. 40 cars line up for the big race. It begins with a rolling start. For the drivers, this is the moment of greatest tension.
The start of the race is probably the most dangerous time and the most nervous time for a driver. You've got all the cars in line, and when that starter drops the green flag, you know, everyone's accelerating. Someone could miss a shift or cause an accident, so you're really careful there.
Well, I think from the spectator standpoint, that's when all the adrenaline gets to flowing, and probably from the driver's standpoint too. And then all of a sudden they turn 40 high-powered cars loose, and they all try to get in the first corner side by side.
There's no space, there's no time to react. Traveling at 200 miles an hour here at Daytona, that's roughly the length of a football field per second. So if something happens, it happens quick, and you don't have time to think.
We don't feel like it's dangerous. Most of the people in the sport don't look at it as being dangerous. Every once in a while we'll have accidents and stuff, and somebody gets hurt. You know, once in a long while somebody gets killed, but we have more problems getting to and from the racetrack. We get more people hurt, more drivers hurt going to and from than we do at the racetrack, because the cars are built to withstand the speeds and the wrecks and stuff that we get into.
Nobody was seriously hurt in this accident in 1990. The race was stopped and restarted. Today, with safer cars and strict rules, multiple pileups still happen, but they're less dangerous than 50 years ago.
Well, there are a lot of guys who are retired who I'm good friends with from knowing them for so long, and they can look back and say, you know, the money wasn't all that great back then, but the thrill of winning was just as good. And it is. The thrill of winning right now is just as strong as it ever has been. And it's even more of an accomplishment right now. You know, in years past, there were 4 or 5 dominant teams who won all the races in a given season. And we have anywhere from, right now, 18 to 20 different people who have a possibility of winning every week.
Drag racing is another very different motorsport in the true American tradition. Each year, the nationwide drag racing fraternity gathers in high spirits at the Indianapolis Raceway Park for the annual convention of Engine Power. It's an ultimate festival of speed. Today, drag racing is a highly organized sport, and its origins are also part of American folklore. It started on the streets of California in the years after the Second World War. Teenagers took family cars, which were cheap and plentiful in America, stripped them down to the essentials, souped up the engines, and turned them into hot rods. With nowhere to race legally, they met usually at night to compete in secret. Many early street racers were soon in trouble with the law. To get them off the streets, the police encouraged the young drivers to organize proper race meetings. But it took time to curb them all.
Both of my parents worked hard. They weren't aware of what I was doing, but I was a street racer in the early 50s. And little did I know in 1958 what this was going to turn into. And later, a few years later, after I got tired of running from the police cars, I went to my first organized racetrack, which was, by today's standards, a total outlaw racetrack. But that's how I got started, and I stuck with it.
A new type of racing was born. To grow, it had to organize and publicize itself. The NHRA, the National Hot Rod Association, was formed in 1951.
A first step that we made after we had come up with some reasonable classes and procedures was to send our safety safari across the United States, which we did in 1954 and 55 and 56. And they went out with the total equipment that they needed to produce a first-time event. They went into communities across the United States and working with the local car clubs and in concert with the law enforcement and civic groups, they produced, demonstrated the first quarter-mile drag race in many of these communities. This was a sort of a Johnny Appleseed campaign where they went in and they planted the seed, they tried to teach the local car clubs and left hoping they'd remember enough of what they had learned in that one weekend. So in that way, we were able to establish drag racing operations and facilities and locations throughout North America.
The formula was simple. Two cars raced each other from a standing start in a straight line for a quarter of a mile. Drag races last seconds rather than hours, but these noisy sprints packed in the crowds. They could see the whole race, and they relished the closeness of danger.
Davy Parker swerves off the strip and cartwheels into the air. He scatters parts all over the area. Luckily, all he got was a scratch on his forehead.
Drag racing is a participation sport. At the national finals, there are classes and races for the many amateur enthusiasts as well as the top professionals. There's almost a family atmosphere among those who take part in drag racing. They're part of a close-knit and loyal brotherhood of enthusiasts.
Oh, I started in the 60s, got into hot rod cars, and I really enjoyed them, and have done it ever since. I've been drag racing since '64. And, you know, it keeps you off the streets and it keeps you from doing a lot of things in life that wouldn't be good for you. So it's worked out good for us.
Drag racing is a very addictive sport. And most of them we've raced over a 15, 20-year period, raced each other. It's sort of like a little family. Most of us, we all got regular jobs, you know, 40-hour work week. And all this right here we do strictly on the side. We're not professionals. And everybody you see here today, they'll have to be at work tomorrow morning.
We've got a lot of good friends that we meet out here every weekend, and it's like going and having a party every weekend. You see the same people over and over, and we have a good time.
Some people drink beer, some people race horses. This is what we do for fun as a family, and you know, we all seem to enjoy it.
My grandson, Michael. Anybody special?
There are over 20,000 amateurs with drag racing licenses, but the top professionals can be numbered in just hundreds.
They're $60.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
For the crowd, one of the most spectacular events is the funny car class. The fuel they use is nitromethane. Funny cars have a shape based on an American stock model, but the similarity stops there.
These cars are very exotic. Mine's an Oldsmobile, and you're talking about a chrome ollie chassis, a very expensive. You're talking about a $150,000 race car sitting there ready to run, and I've got 3 of them. We use the term exotic because of the involvement, the nitromethane. I mean, you're talking, you know, $1,200, $1,300 a drum for a drum of nitro. Now, this car, you put 15 gallons in it in 5 seconds. It's gone. We're talking about a race car, understand, that's like the space shuttle. This thing leaves with 4 Gs from the starting line. Unbelievable. It'll set you back. If your visor ever opened, it'd roll your eyeballs. It'll take a week to get them back in your head. You're talking about a car that goes from a dead stop to the end of quarter mile in 5 seconds or less. It's like a bullfight. People go to see a show. They didn't come here to watch us sing, tell jokes. They come here to see us perform. And in the back of their minds, they know at these speeds somebody can get hurt. Nobody wants to see anybody hurt, but it's part of the deal, and that's what makes it exciting.
In the top class of the sport are the top fuel cars. They're named after the potent cocktails which their engines burn. They're built for speed with no concessions to style. These are the cars most drag racers want to drive.
When I was about 11 years old, I went to this race, the U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I saw a race, and I said that's what I wanted to do with my life. Someday I wanted to drive a top fuel dragster. So when I was 16, I started racing stock type cars, regular slow cars, and just progressed over the years. And every couple of years I would go faster and faster into a different class, and I worked up through gas cars and alcohol supercharged dragsters and alcohol funny cars. Then about 10 years ago I started running top fuel dragsters. Basically right now we run the kings of the sports, they call them. They're the world's fastest wheel-driven car. They can accelerate a 1,900-pound car from 0 to 290 miles per hour in less than 5 seconds from a dead start.
Well, I think that it takes a special person to go from 0 to 280 miles an hour in 5 seconds. I don't think that's easy to do. We pull 4.5 to 5 Gs on a run, which is, 4.5 to 5 times the force of gravity against your body. The space shuttle only does like 2.5, 3. There are a lot of things that you have to do, and you do have to have the ability to control one of these cars at 280 miles an hour and to make quick decisions because you don't have a lot of time to ponder what you're going to do next. Racing is a mental sport, not a physical sport. Even though it's considered a sport, we're not physical athletes, we're mental athletes. And you have to be able to control yourself mentally and to be able to slow everything down so that you're not overwhelmed by what's happening to you. You're able to make good judgments and good calls in a very short amount of time. That's what makes a good race car driver, someone who reacts quickly and reacts the right way.
At this level, drag racing is a high-technology sport. The engine in a top fuel car produces 4,000 horsepower, 50 times the output of an average family car. Each engine costs more than a luxury car. Top teams have 3 for each dragster. Drag racing is about finding the best way to transfer huge amounts of power from the engine through the tires to the track without wasting it by spinning the wheels and burning the rubber. They call it putting the power on the pavement. It's achieved through a combination of special tires and sophisticated clutches which release the engine's energy as effectively as possible. Even though a race lasts only 5 seconds, the strain on every part of the car is enormous.
Change ignition systems now, okay?
After each run, a team of race mechanics strip down the engine. Every part is minutely examined and replaced if necessary. Then the engine is reassembled and the car is ready to race again, all in 90 minutes.
I just looked at the cylinder walls. Everything looks good out there. Oh, I'm looking for scuff on the rings. The pistons are old. All the marks that you see on them got there over time, you know.
To get every last ounce of power out of the engine, performance is monitored by an onboard computer. Data is compared with previous runs and fed into the system.
The computer takes all the guesswork out for us here. We know what the temperatures are supposed to be, what the pressures are supposed to be, basing those off of the runs that we set the national records with. We only know how to go as quick as those runs. We'll continuously try different setups or different engine combinations to improve, but 9 times out of 10, they're no better. They may be just the same, but it only takes that one time to make it go a little quicker, and all of a sudden, all of your data is updated to the setup that makes you go quicker and faster.
With such dependence on the computer, some people have begun to question the importance of the driver.
You know, you can't win the Kentucky Derby on Joe's mule. And it's the same way here. You can't win the U.S. Nationals with a car that won't run good, no matter how good of a driver you are. It's a combination. You've got to have a good car, and you've got to have somebody that drives it. And there's been a lot of skepticism about whether or not we're very important anymore. But I've lost several races because my competitor did a better job of driving their car than I did. So the drivers are certainly important.
Drag racing is a successful combination of amateur enthusiasts and high-cost professionalism. With its democratic roots, it is now, like stock car racing, part of America's unique tradition of motorsport.
With a $11,000 scholarship going to the SEMA Scholarship Fund.
Hitler's determination to prove Germany's technical superiority during the 30s is next week's subject in Racing for the Reich.